Hello, welcome back to Rogue Startups. I'm your host, Craig Hewitt. Today, we're talking all about growth experiments, growth data, programmatic SEO. So using code and automating a lot of content creation and SEO with Stuart from Growth Method. Stuart and I have known each other for about 5 years, ever since the first and only Big Snow Tiny Conf Europe. So kind of ski trip with me and 3 other founders in Chamonix, France. Stuart was one of those. We've kind of stayed in touch ever since then. I think it's kind of the power of this world that we're living in these days. You can meet somebody once, stay in touch, and then have them back on the podcast like this to talk about something really, really interesting. And Stuart's doing some really cool things with programmatic SEO and running growth experiments. And I'm excited to share that with you today. Let's dive into this conversation with Stuart from Growth Method. Okay, so Stuart, I've known you for, I was thinking about it, 5 or 6 years. You went to the one and only of ski retreat we did when I lived in France. That was pretty awesome. I think about that weekend a lot. But we haven't caught up in a while until recently, and love to dig into kind of what's going on with you and Growth Method. For folks who aren't familiar with Growth Method, you want to give kind of the quick update on kind of who y'all are and what you do?
Yeah, so the website says, I think, project management for growth marketing teams, something like that. But I find it's quite useful to describe maybe what it isn't rather than it is first. So Asana and Trello and ClickUp and all the project management tools everyone know. A lot of the focus is around activity rather than impact. So there's loads of tasks and subtasks and delegation and Gantt charts and list views and calendar views and all of this stuff that isn't focused around impact. And so we're trying to basically do the opposite. So we connect to Google Analytics or Salesforce or HubSpot, and then everything you do in the platform is tracked against a growth goal and a metric. So it's we're basically trying to make it very hard to do work that doesn't have impact. That's kind of the goal. So it's still a work in progress. We're got a good number of customers on board, but yeah, definitely not finished yet.
Got it. So I know from chatting that you try to focus a particular type of customer for this, right? Because I would guess smaller companies like ours, maybe not a great fit. Big old huge companies like Asana, maybe not a great fit, right? Because they're just probably too big to fit into an opinionated tool and a workflow like you kind of espouse. Is that fair?
Yeah. Customer size is really mixed. So I've got a couple of customers with a team of 5 people, the whole company, and then one at 50 and then one at 7,000. So that doesn't seem to be fit in terms of size. I think it's more culture and willingness to adopt more of an experimentation type approach to marketing. Growth and experimentation, I find, as we'll come on to, I think most of people reach out through SEO because they've been Googling and trying to find this stuff. So the first call, I'm typically hearing something I came across you guys having looked for some way to manage experiments better, something like that. Yeah. And I found I had a few calls with more traditional B2B marketing teams, and trying to change the culture of a team that's already not operating in that way is not fun and often not possible. So I'm trying not to do that, at least not right now.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So kind of mindset more than company size, experimental, companies who embrace really an experiment first kind of mindset when it comes to growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or a willingness certainly a willingness to adopt it. If you're a big enterprise company that runs a marketing campaign every quarter with little data, and the hippo says this is going to be the subject of this campaign, or we're going to spend $100,000 on ads and we don't really know what's going to work. That's not where I'm at.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. What is growth experiments? What does that mean to you and to your customers?
So I can describe it from the sort of software point of view. So when you create, you can think of an experiment like a task, I guess. And I've been through, should it be a task or a sprint or an experiment? It sort of doesn't matter what it's called. But various things are sort of set in stone. You talked about opinionated, software is quite opinionated. So I guess the first thing is an experiment is 28 days long. So in growth methods, when you get to 28 days, we automatically move it into analyzing. So it's not in progress anymore. So you basically can't go longer than 28 days without recording some learning. And then there's various other things, like you have to write a hypothesis. The hypothesis has to be aligned to a goal, which is preset in advance and tied to something like GA4 or Salesforce or HubSpot, like we talked about. You have to include data in that hypothesis, and then you start running it, basically, whatever you're going to do. So rather than like, maybe a simple example is, instead of a company that like spends lots of time and effort publishing blog posts, but like never going back to them and looking at them again, we'd be like, come up with a hypothesis of why you're going to write on this topic and what traffic you think you're going to gain from it, or conversions, whatever your metric is. Outline like your reasons behind that, run it for 28 days, see if you've got some positive impact, like you're heading in the right direction. It might not be that if your goal is conversions, in 28 days, you're probably not going to get conversions, or you might not, depends on the size of the company. But you should get some positive signal you're moving in the right direction. And that should give you the confidence to either like move forward and try a next iteration or scrap it. So you're just sort of trying to increase that kind of velocity and learning and sharing those learnings across the team as much as possible.
Gotcha. Okay, so 28 days. To me, that's kind of like a good, like short to middle term view. Like you said, you might not be 100% like have an answer, but you'll have like some data that you're probably trending the right direction. A couple questions around that. Like, are we talking like page views or conversion events or time on page, or like what's an endpoint metric that people try to like align that goal with?
Yeah, mostly some conversion metrics.
Okay.
So usually like leads, MQLs, trials, demos, meetings booked.
And how many experiments do you suggest people run at a time?
It's a really good question. So we've got a health metric, and there's a lot of back and forth around what this metric should be, but it's basically experiments completed in a month, and we give you an average. And for most of the new teams, I'm basically aiming for between 1 or 2. So like keep it really simple to start with, and then like it moves up from there. But you can imagine with content, if you were to adopt this approach, that you get to a point where you've got like a baseline number of pieces of content, and then you're almost forced by the software to come back and review them every 28 days. So if you're trying to get to like position 1 for a piece of content and you're currently like on page 5, it might take you 3 or 4 iterations to get to position 1, but you're continuing moving towards that goal and learning along the way. And then every time you complete it, you share the learnings with the team, talk through them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of encouraging people to be moving in the right direction and to adopt this like more iterative mindset, and not like I published it, so it's done.
Right.
In fact, we like actively try to prevent people from not doing something once they've completed the first experiment. So you do that 28 days. You maybe analyze the metrics. You find you're on page 3 and you're trying to get to page 1. Like when you hit complete, it pops up with a thing and says, "Do you want to share this with stakeholders?" And you can like copy a shareable link that's valid for 40 days. And then like the primary button is, I can't remember quite what the language is, but something like iterate on this or create a new version. I think it's create a new version.
Okay.
So you're basically encouraged to like do the next thing, because in most situations, it's quite unlikely that like you're done, it's perfect. There's nothing that could potentially be improved with the thing that you've just shipped, whether that's ads or SEO or A/B testing, whatever. It's kind of constantly thinking about like, what can I do to make it better?
Okay. So the counter argument to this kind of testing based like growth mindset that I've heard is most of us, and I'll say kind of like small to medium sized businesses or businesses that don't have like a ton of page views or users or impressions or conversion events, don't have enough data to be testing things as like a growth mechanism. You know, it's more like just like on off tests, or just don't test it all and go with your intuition. Like what's your position on that for?
That's pretty interesting.
Like, so I'll just say Castos, we have about 100,000 unique website visitors a month. We get hundreds of trial starts a month, and we convert, 70% of those. Like, do we get enough data to run these kinds of marketing and growth experiments?
Yeah. You've got a lot more data than a lot of my customers. Yeah. I think, A/B testing and like statistical significance has given experimentation like a little bit of a bad rap, or like,
Okay.
I think there's most business decisions are made without a lot of supporting data. Like you don't, if you think about like the number of decisions that you're making on a daily basis, most of them aren't made with statistical significance. So like to kind of put quite that amount of pressure on a marketing team, I think is not particularly helpful. You can still track metrics and feel confident that you're moving in the right direction without needing that. And I think the sort of B2C e-commerce world where you've like got a really short transaction cycle, like you're buying a pair of shoes, the transaction happens straight away. There's millions of people looking at the site, and we're like, well, if I add this kind of free delivery option below the buy now button, and test it with our millions of users, and we get an uplift, then like, that's how A/B testing should work. And there's just so much more to sort of experimentation. I think a huge amount of it is the learning piece. And if you're going back to my original example, if you're writing a piece of content, I keep coming back to SEO just because I know it's something we're going to talk about a little bit. But like, if you write a piece of content, publish it, and you're done, and you never look at anything afterwards, you're learning nothing. Whereas if you go through this approach and start to understand, like, how long does it take us to rank? Which page do we normally rank on? How long does it take us to move up the rankings? Like, what sort of thing, if we start doing loads of internal linking, what impact does that have? Like, and you share that with the team. It just goes out via emails as you're going on this way. You have so much more insight and understanding, which develops into like the likelihood of your next experiment working just increases over time.
Yeah. You know, I know, like I remember Rob Walling talking about like a marketing change log, right? We have it with development. We know we have source code and version control and everything, but we often don't have this for marketing where like, oh, I updated the homepage copy here, or we added this blog post here. To go back and correlate the data you see in Google Analytics or in ChartMogul or in the bank account, at the end of the day. And kind of what I'm hearing is this is a much more kind of beefed up version of that for active marketing teams who want to be able to kind of track and attribute things they're doing to like actual outcomes and the bottom line. Yeah,
it's really interesting. At one point, I think the positioning was around like GitHub for marketers, which I thought was quite interesting. I quite like that idea. We don't like, I don't think it's particularly like in the design phase. So you move through a couple of stages within growth method, and there's in design or planning, running, analyzing, complete. That planning bit, like we don't require anything other than a small piece of text to describe what you're doing. The most useful function of just having some idea of what you've done or are doing is firstly the team get a notification as soon as something moves to in progress. So like if you're one of a team of 10, everyone knows you've just shipped something without having to like find it. And also, as you said, if it doesn't work and you come back and you decide to unwind what you've done, you've got a clear idea of what you've done. But typically that's like a few bullet points or a sentence or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, because for us, it's just, someone pops something in Slack. Hey, I published this video or this blog post is live, or you get your own email. It's like keeping track of marketing efforts is challenging some. Cool. Okay. So I want to switch gears sort of to talk about programmatic SEO. So why don't you define how you view like what programmatic SEO is, and I'll see if I understand it right.
I thought about this before we chatted actually. I think the sort of true industry definition is probably more like what the likes of TransferWise and Zapier do with, like they have products that lend themselves very well to automatically creating SEO content from the product itself, right? So TransferWise have thousands of pages for every variation of every currency exchange in the world. And I think every bank rate for every currency exchange in the world. And Zapier obviously do the same thing for their apps. So you can do like connecting HubSpot to Google Sheets, connecting HubSpot to Slack, connecting HubSpot to everything, right? And again, thousands and thousands of pages. So their products lend themselves really well to that, and they can automate a huge amount of content. That's definitely like the traditional and probably best way of doing it if there's an angle within your product that allows you to do it. What we've started doing at Growth Method more is like, is there a way to adopt some of that like programmatic approach without pulling it solely from a product? Probably the easiest way to describe it is I have an Airtable like database with a ton of content in it, and a lot of that content powers what's on the WordPress site. So there's tables for like growth courses, growth consultants, growth experts, growth agencies, growth hacking agencies, like all of that kind of stuff. And that powers a lot of the content in a sort of programmatic type way. From a database.
Okay, cool. So we'll use a fictional example, and I want to walk through like how we're thinking, because we're embarking on a couple of programmatic SEO initiatives, some powered with AI, most all kind of powered with AI, and I think this is really cool. So let's say we are a review site. I think this is a fair thing. We want to create a bunch of A versus B comparisons, right? So like Ford F-150 versus Chevy, whatever it is these days, right? Or these Elgato lights we were just talking about versus some other thing, right? I'm imagining we build a spreadsheet with sort of like rows for each of the options, right? And then, or columns for each of the options, and rows for like price and image and description and pros and cons and best for like use cases or something like that, right? And then you take the spreadsheet and somehow get that into like a structured type page in WordPress for each of the permutations of like A versus B and A versus C and A versus D. And you create hundreds of pages like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the versus bit actually, with, I used, OpenAI, but the ability for it to now browse using Bing search, it does an incredibly good job in the testing that I've done, creating like A versus B in a table without you having to give it any information whatsoever. So if you could say like, create me a HTML comparison table of Trello versus Asana, and it'll list out like 10 core features and benefits and tell you like what's got what in it, without you having to power anything. So yes, exactly as you said, but you may need to do less work than you think, particularly if the products or services you're comparing are kind of pretty well known. Like it's likely to be in their model because it's a biggish company, then they'll do a pretty good job.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I did it for exactly that case, and it came out like the content was, I'd say like probably as good as I could have done on my own with like half an hour of time. Don't let me forget. I want to come back to like, if that's the case, is this still worth doing? Because I think that's just like a big question, is like if the bar is so low or the barrier is so low. But before we do that, we haven't quite, we did what a lot of programming tutorials did, is you do this and you do this, and then you have a Ferrari over here, right? But we skipped like the 87 steps to get the Ferrari. How do you go from the spreadsheet to WordPress? I use make.com, but you could use Zapier, or I think there's loads of them. Okay. Pretty similar, right? Most people seem to use Make, or Zapier seem to be the big two. So, it just pushes it straight into, there's literally a Zap or scenario in Make's terms for push to WordPress, or create a post.
So you have like, when a new row is added in this Google Sheet, make a post in WordPress with these attributes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And where it gets quite interesting is, so I have a database, like an Airtable base with all of this like content in this example, like comparison content in it, and then a separate one for posts on the website. And then every time I push one, I record it in the posts table. And then you can start doing stuff like, they're all tagged as well. So if there's a topic that I'm writing about, trying to trying to generate some like topical authority about something, like prioritization frameworks works really well for us, right? And there's like 10 of them. They're all tagged as prioritization framework. And then when you write a new one or update one, you can say like, go and query that posts database and tell me all the other ones. And you can then do like related content and interlinking. And then you could tell like OpenAI, when you're writing about this, reference related posts that it's pulled from Airtable.
Okay.
And it'll do like, you can tell it update the last updated time, publish my little bio, stick this CTA in the middle of it, generate the meta description for me from the content you've created. It gets really interesting.
I mean, this is in the weeds for folks who don't use WordPress, but all with like the block editor, or are you pasting in like HTML or just plain text or what? So I do the formatting via make.com. So I'll literally like wrap it in a P tag or an image tag or whatever it might be, and then just push it straight into WordPress. And I think it's like when you view it, it's native pre-Gutenberg, but you can just hit convert to blocks and it'll show it all as blocks if you need to edit anything. Right, but on the front end, it's good, right? It's all formatted. Interesting. Okay. We're kind of like halfway through that. We're to the point where we have about 90% of the spreadsheet, and we're kind of struggling with how do we go from the spreadsheet to get it into WordPress. We've looked at a plugin called WP All Import, which lets you kind of map spreadsheet or CSV fields to a post. So you could do like post title, image, like featured image, all that kind of stuff. But I think the place we're struggling a little bit is like, it's not exactly the same as what you're talking about, I don't think, because we're literally going to have like for each post 2 different sets of content because we want to do comparisons. So it's not just like this is a review and these are the structured data about the review, but it's like this one and then this one. So I think we're struggling a little bit with how to do that. We may have to do like a custom page template or something a little more fancy with that.
And I think WP import, I used to run WordPress agency, so I know a little bit. I think it's like would be a one-off, or you maybe you could schedule it, but I think it's more built for like, we're going to do an import of this stuff at this period of time, right? I think the advantage of the Make Zapier type approach is it's more like always on in terms of you have your Airtable database of your features and comparison stuff. And if you find something new tomorrow and one of your team goes in and updates it, it could be just polling it every day and updating the content. Or like there's a big, I don't know, GPT-5 comes out and suddenly the content is written so way better. You can just say like, rerun all our posts today. If I do the same, I've got glossary content, and if I add something to it, it just reruns every week and updates the content. So then you're like freshness as well from a Google perspective is, I think it kind of, it looks like it's continually getting updated, which I guess is what they want to see. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense. Did you have any kind of like fear about, and I'm sure you tested it, but like, what if this goes wrong? We're going to publish 100 blog posts that are all wrong. And then how are we going to undo that? Like, we don't really know what we're doing. Like that's kind of one of my fears is this project is like 300 articles for us probably.
Oh, wow, that's quite a lot.
And so like pushing go on that is, and I don't see an easy way to just do like 10 and then pick it up from 11 to 300. So how did you approach that?
I haven't done 300, which is probably the time is probably the most I've gone to so far. So I can just keep an eye on it. I mean, I don't see why, from a like technology point of view, there's no issue. I think the only risk would be like Google goes, why have you just posted 300 articles when you normally do one a month or week or whatever it might be? So maybe like 300 sounds like quite a lot to me. I'd be tempted to do like 20 or 50 at a time or something like that. But again, if you use the kind of Make Zapier approach, you could just tell it to run one a day or one a 10 a week, or whatever you want to do, and do less of a big bulk upload.
And I may be getting kind of making it more complicated than it needs to be, because I think some of the value of programmatic content isn't necessarily like, is this the most beautifully designed like landing page ever? But like, if we want to compare like the Ford F-150 versus the Chevy, whatever it is, if we just have like one, and like if we just have the Ford and then we have the Chevy below it, and it's all kind of plain text and bullet points and a couple of images, like I don't know that that's so much worse than a bunch of beautiful tables and all of this stuff. Like how much kind of UX did you go into when you were creating these pieces?
Not a lot. So, and at the moment they're pretty plain and vanilla, I would say. Like there's the blocks that would be styled in Gutenberg are styled when that gets pushed into WordPress. So like a quote block, for example, looks decent, and an image like looks decent. Obviously the text is formatted as it would be if you wrote it. So we don't really go outside. Like they're not landing pages, they're posts, which is maybe part of the answer. But it is very much, the goal is sort of search traffic over anything else at this point. But where I quite like this programmatic approach is I think there are a huge number of options for improving the kind of design, aesthetic quality of the content once that baseline is in place. So I've been looking at things like using Banner Bear to automatically create a really nice looking quote block in our kind of brand and incorporate that into it. And then like pretty soon, I imagine the DALL-E image generation stuff will be good enough to say like, create me a custom image based on this post, and you put that in it. So like, and probably not far off that will be like, create me a little video that describes this thing, like with my head in it. It's probably not that far in the future as well. Right? So I think like if you've got the base content and this ability to connect these different services, I think there's tons that can be done with it.
Yeah, cool. Any kind of learnings that you want to pass along around like how you're using ChatGPT and OpenAI for the content creation?
I use the I can't remember what it's called now. Custom instructions, I think it's called, something like that. Okay. So I use the API through Make or Zapier, but I have a set list. I can tell you what it says actually. So I have a number of instructions, like five little bullet points that basically say, you're a growth marketing, agile marketing expert. You write for an audience of B2B marketers, use UK English language only, write with the comprehension and readability level of a senior school student, use active voice where possible. Like those prompts, like they may not be the best prompts in the world, but they make a huge difference to the quality of the content you get back. So I think, think about those and make sure that powers like everything that you use.
You know, like this is a bit of a detour, but I am of the mind that I think I would like to hire like an AI coach or something. And that sounds so weird to say, but I feel like there's so much opportunity with all this. And I mean, it's just, it's probably a perfect place for a coach is instead of me going into ChatGPT and futzing around with all this shit, if I could pay someone $50 an hour and meet with them once a week to show me, okay, if you want to create content and you want to do this thing, these are the 8 things you need to include in your prompt. Like I can just imagine, like if you do that every week, how that compounds. Like that would be okay. So audience, if you are up for this, $50, 30 minutes once a week, let's do it. Send me a message, craig@castos.com. Because I think it's huge. I mean, the little bit that I use ChatGPT and AI, it's amazing. It does so good to like that 90% level, you know? And like, fuck, if I could pay a little bit of money to get that last 5 or 7%, like 100% I would do it. And then it's not just help me write blog posts, but like help me automate the rest of my business, analyze our financials, help me manage this person, help me do all this stuff.
Totally.
Because I think that like, I mean, I think there's so much about what we do right now that AI will change, I'll say at least, you know?
So I first sort of started exploring it after I tried multiple times hiring writers, and maybe I just had bad luck, but it just did not work. I just found it so frustrating. Like you put a job out, you get loads of responses, you have to trawl through them all. I do like test kind of page tests with a few people and like whittle it down, and then like someone's like, oh, I've got another job. Like, that was a waste of time. And then just like the content comes back was like, it was good, but it wasn't amazing. And I think I was paying reasonable rates. And I got to this point of like, and then the business model just seems, and then I think it was around the time that like ChatGPT was released, and like the writers are charging by like per word or by numbers of words. And I'm like, this is like nuts at this point. Given like where the technology is at, to be saying we're going to charge you X cents a word just seems so far away from like where the world is going. And as you said, like the more you get into the sort of AI tools, the more you realize how capable they are. And like I got to a point where I'm like, I think if I power this thing, like it maybe takes a little bit of my time in terms of coming up with like this framework and the structure and the tools and everything, but the end result is like not far off what I get from a copywriter. And so it makes more sense for my time to do that than it does to use a copywriter. Yeah. It wasn't even a money thing. It was just a kind of quality of content and efficiency.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I've heard folks like Brian Castle say they've split tested human generated content and AI content, and the AI content wins across the board, like blind taste test kind of things, but also like traffic and engagement and rankings and stuff. So I saw on Twitter this morning, Josh Howard, who was a guest on the podcast before, has a thing where he's having AI write the entire script for his YouTube videos. And it's kind of like a blind channel, and he's doing all of the growth and all of the scripting just with AI, and he's taking it directly from there and he's shooting the videos. And so, I mean, I think like I'm using a little bit of ChatGPT to write YouTube scripts for me, but it's definitely far off because it doesn't sound like me. So you can say, hey, write me a YouTube script on this topic, but then it sounds like ChatGPT and not like me because I have a certain tone and style and stuff. And I think, I don't know, for me, I think especially like when it's you talking, it has to be even more on point than written content.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other bit I just wanted to touch on was I think you still need a smart, knowledgeable person to like power it. I think this idea that like you can have no inside expertise in an industry and just like create a load of content doesn't work. I know you did your sort of mini series around YouTube SEO. I think like all of that stuff still applies. So I think using AI, if you're trying to use it for SEO traffic, using AI without understanding like the basics of SEO and your industry really well won't help you. Because you still need like the content structure. You need to give it the right questions, the right context. You need to understand the topics that you're going to rank for and how these different articles within those topics interlink. So yeah,
100%. Yeah. And I think the last bit that is a bit of a skeptical take for me on programmatic content in general, but also just like a lot of content that AI can do really well today is it's really top of funnel. Right? Like you're probably not going to get ChatGPT to write you like a conversion focused landing page for you, Castos versus, Captivate or whatever, right? Like probably not going to do as well as I could do or Dennis from our team could do with all the context that we have. But it sure as hell could write a great like microphone review article or listicle of best true crime podcasts or something like that. So that's my only kind of hesitation is I like to write content as low in the funnel as we can. And at least so far, it's not doing a great job of that.
Yeah, I agree. I sort of, in my structure things, like I use the AI, most of the AI content is sort of child content to a parent theme, if you like. So like really, I wrote around like attribution recently, for example. So like AI generated tons of like maybe 10 or so articles around like what is time decay attribution, multi-channel attribution, all the different like attribution models, right? First touch, last touch, etc., etc.
Yep.
And then I write the like what is attribution parent article that links all of those together. And that sort of model has worked across all of that content, really. It's like you can't get it to write the kind of more nuanced top level article, but it gives you, in my experience, gives you some like topical authority to rank for that one article. If you're having more.
Cool. So kind of circling back to programmatic, like what are things that when you were rolling this out, or if you're talking to me and we're about to publish 300 articles, what are things that you feel like people should be like aware of or worried about as they're getting into this?
I'd say start small, like maybe not.
Come on.
I'd like get into the weeds with maybe try it for a few articles, but like more kind of figuring out you're going to give it you're going to give like OpenAI a prompt, and it's going to give you a response back, obviously. And if you give it the wrong prompt, you're going to get a response back, or it might start the sentence in a wrong way. So you're going to say, like, if you have a heading that says, I don't know, what is the Chevy 150? If that was the Ford 150.
Yeah, Ford, but it's okay.
The Ford 150. You probably don't want it. You might want it to start in a really specific way. Like maybe you want like the Ford 150 at the start of the sentence, for example. And sometimes you get the wrong prompt, it might come back with like, I don't know, we can't browse right. Browsing isn't available right now, or something like that. So you need to be careful that like you don't get those kinds of outputs. So I'd say start with like the really simple. I started with like glossary content. What is content? Mostly text, and then go into like the kind of versus content, as you said. Maybe put listicles in the middle. Actually, I go glossary, listicles, versus, and then start experimenting with like creating tables, adding quote blocks, including video content, those sorts of things.
Cool. Interesting. I'm going to give a shout out. We had Spencer Hawes on the show probably just a couple episodes ago as this goes live. He has a fantastic plugin for WordPress called Link Whisper, which kind of automatically in bulk adds internal links between articles. And so I think it's a perfect match for something like this, because you could go publish those 300 articles and then just go and say, add links. I mean, you have to go into each one, but it picks out, okay, from all these other places, here's where you could link from that article to this article, and then vice versa. So you would probably have to manually go through each of those 300 articles and add the handful of internal links. But it sure as hell beats like manually doing that and find like you were talking about, finding all these existing articles to link to. So I'm sure he's thinking about how to automatically add those links. But there's a little bit of like review and suggestion you have to do still.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. Sounds super helpful.
Yeah. Neat. Cool. Stuart, anything you want to leave folks with on kind of growth and experimentation, programmatic SEO?
I don't think so. If anyone's got any questions, very happy to receive emails and messages and tweets and anything else.
Cool.
I don't think I can share. We can catch up afterwards. If I can share like some of the scenario in the Make world, the like scenarios, if I can share links to them, I think some of them you can share like public links. And then we can put in the show notes as well. It could be quite interesting to see.
Beautiful.
See how they're built.
Cool. So we'll either include links or maybe just like screenshots in the show notes. Sure. That'd be great. So awesome. Stuart, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. I'm going to go dive into some AI and programmatic SEO. This is fun.
It's Valentine's Day, so I'm definitely not going to be doing that.
All right. Enjoy. All right. Thanks.
Yes. Speak soon. Bye.